The cargo ship tumbled through space, its emergency lights flashing red against the dark metal walls. Jack gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white, as he tried to keep the damaged vessel steady. The asteroid storm had come out of nowhere, ripping through his ship's right engine and sending him spiraling toward an unknown planet below. Come on, he muttered, fighting with the controls as the ship entered the planet's atmosphere. Warning alarms screamed around him as the hull temperature rose to dangerous levels. Through the viewport, he could see pieces of his ship's outer plating breaking away, glowing orange as they fell. The ground rushed up to meet him faster than he'd hoped. Jack had just enough time to notice he was heading toward what looked like a valley before he had to make his final decision: crash in the mountains and definitely die, or try for the valley floor and maybe survive. He chose the valley. The impact threw him against his safety harness so hard it knocked the wind out of him. Metal screamed against rock as the ship skidded across the ground, leaving a trail of broken parts behind it. When the vessel finally stopped moving, Jack hung limply in his chair, tasting blood from where he bit his cheek. He was alive, somehow, but he wasn't alone in the sky that day. High above, a sleek scout ship with smooth, curved lines, unlike any human vessel, was tracking his descent. Its pilot, a tall, thin being with iridescent blue skin that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light of their cockpit, made a quick decision. The pilot's people, the Meridians, had a strict non-interference policy with undiscovered species, but they couldn't just watch someone die. The scout ship dove into the atmosphere, trying to get close enough to assist the falling cargo vessel. But something was wrong. The planet's gravity was stronger than their sensors had indicated, and the atmospheric composition was playing havoc with their engines. The Meridian pilot, known as Blue among their own kind for their particularly vivid coloring, soon found their ship in the same predicament as the human they tried to help. Their engine controls weren't responding, and the ground was approaching fast. Too fast. Blue managed to aim for the same valley, hoping the relatively flat ground would give them a chance at survival. Their ship came down hard about half a kilometer from Jack's crash site, bouncing twice before grinding to a halt in a shower of sparks and torn metal. Jack had just managed to free himself from his safety harness when he saw the second ship go down. He grabbed his emergency kit, standard issue for all cargo pilots, and stumbled out of his ruined vessel. The air hit his lungs like warm soup, thick and slightly sweet-smelling. His emergency kit's analyzer beeped a warning. Breathable, but with high levels of unknown compounds. Not immediately deadly, but not good for long-term exposure either. He started walking toward the other crash site, curiosity overtaking caution. The ship's design was like nothing he'd ever seen before, and after 15 years hauling cargo through the outer colonies, he'd seen plenty of ships. Blue emerged from their vessel just as Jack approached. Both beings froze, staring at each other in shock. Jack saw a creature unlike anything in human records. Tall, willowy, with skin that seemed to catch and reflect light like polished metal. Blue saw a stocky, pink-skinned being with strange fur on its face, wearing the plain gray jumpsuit of a cargo pilot. They stood there for a long moment, neither moving, neither sure what to do. Then the ground trembled slightly, and a low howl echoed from somewhere in the distance. Both beings turned toward the sound, then back to each other. In that moment, they both realized the same thing. Whatever their differences, this planet was a far bigger threat than either of them posed to each other. Jack slowly raised his hands to show they were empty. Blue responded by taking a careful step forward, then pointed to their own chest, and made a sound like chimes in the wind. The howl came again, closer this time. They had bigger problems than first contact protocol. The first night on the planet taught Jack and Blue just how deadly their new home could be. As the local sun set, the temperature dropped so fast that frost began forming on their crashed ships. Within an hour, Jack's emergency thermometer showed -40 degrees. They had no choice but to huddle in Blue's ship, which still had some power for basic heating. Jack sat near the ship's window, watching ice crystals spread across the glass. He could see his breath even inside the ship. Next to him, Blue worked on a small device that translated their musical language into basic words. The aliens' fingers moved quickly, adjusting tiny parts with careful precision. A sharp crack made them both jump. Outside, a tree had split open from the extreme cold, its trunk breaking apart like shattered glass. But that wasn't what worried them. In the darkness beyond the broken tree, several pairs of eyes reflected the ship's emergency lights. "Look," Jack whispered, pointing. Blue moved closer to the window, their iridescent skin dimming in what Jack was learning to recognize as a sign of concern. The translation device in Blue's hand crackled. "Predators," it said in a flat, mechanical voice, different from day hunters. They watched as the creatures moved closer. They walked on 6 legs, each one tipped with what looked like hooks. Their bodies were covered in thick fur that seemed to change color to match the shadows. But worst of all were their heads. Each creature had 3 of them on long, flexible necks. "Great," Jack muttered. 3 heads means 3 sets of teeth. The creatures circled their ship for hours, occasionally scratching at the hull. Only when the first sun rose did they finally retreat into the shadows of the crystalline mountains that surrounded the valley. But the day brought its own problems. As the temperature climbed, Jack checked his thermometer again. 50 degrees, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. That's a 90-degree change in less than 12 hours. Blue's translator crackled. Plants releasing spores in heat. They could see it happening. As the temperature rose, the local plants were opening up, releasing clouds of purple spores into the air. The spores drifted like lazy smoke, coating everything they touched with a fine powder. Jack coughed. Even inside the ship, his chest felt tight. Blue was having similar problems. Their breathing had become raspy, and their skin's natural glow was getting duller. Using hand gestures and the translator, they decided to check their crashed ships for anything useful. They needed better shelter and a way to clean the air they were breathing. As they walked between the ships, Jack noticed something strange about the ground. "Look at these marks," he said, pointing to long scratches in the soil. "These aren't from our crashes." Blue studied the marks, then used the translator. "Ancient. Many machines landed here before." They followed the marks to a cliff face. Years of storms had worn away the rock, revealing something underneath, something metal. But before they could investigate further, a screech filled the air. Different from the night creatures, this cry came from above. Looking up, they saw flying creatures circling. They had wide, leathery wings and long beaks filled with needle-sharp teeth. "Run," Jack shouted, but Blue was already moving. They barely made it back to the ship before the flying hunters dove at them. Sharp beaks hammered against the ship's hull, leaving dents in the metal. Safe inside, but breathing hard, they looked at each other. Their situation was clear. The planet was trying to kill them in every way possible. The night brought freezing death and ground hunters. The day brought burning heat, toxic spores, and death from above. Blue's translator sparked to life. "Need better shelter. Need clean air, or we die soon." Jack nodded, still catching his breath. "Those marks we found. That metal in the cliff. Maybe someone else got stranded here before us. Maybe they built something that could help us survive." Outside, the flying creatures continued their attack, their cries mixing with the sound of their beaks striking metal. Time was running out, and they both knew it. They needed to find better shelter before nightfall brought back the cold and the 3-headed hunters. Their survival depended on solving this planet's ancient mysteries. On their 4th day on the deadly planet, Jack thought rescue had finally arrived. A faint beeping from his damaged emergency beacon made his heart jump. He rushed to Blue, who was trying to repair their ship's communication array using parts from both crashed vessels. "Something's picked up our signal," Jack said, holding up the beacon. Its weak red light blinked steadily, showing that someone had locked onto their location. Blue's translator crackled. "Ship coming." "See it." They pointed at a bright spot in the purple sky that was growing larger. Both of them hurried outside, despite the day's burning heat and toxic spores floating in the air. Jack pulled his torn shirt over his nose, while Blue's natural membrane filtered out the worst of the poisons. They watched as the rescue ship, a human vessel, descended through the atmosphere. That's when everything went wrong. The same gravity problems that had dragged down their ships caught the rescue vessel. Its engines flared brightly as it fought against the planet's pull. Jack and Blue could only watch helplessly as the ship struggled, then finally turned back, disappearing into space. No, Jack slammed his fist against a nearby rock. They were so close. Blue put a long-fingered hand on his shoulder. The translator sparked. "We'll try my people's way now." They spent the next few hours connecting Blue's communication array to power cells from Jack's ship. The work was dangerous. They had to run between their shelters and the work site as the flying hunters made diving attacks. Each time they went outside, they could feel the toxic spores burning their lungs a little more. Just before sunset, they finished. Blue's communication array hummed to life, sending out a meridian distress signal. The sound it made reminded Jack of Blue's musical language. They waded through another freezing night, huddled in their makeshift shelter as the three-headed hunters prowled outside. Neither of them slept much. Jack's cough was getting worse, and Blue's skin had lost most of its shine. Morning brought their second chance at rescue. A Meridian ship, sleek and silver, appeared in the sky. It moved differently than the human rescue ship, using some kind of gravity technology to fight the planet's pull. "They will succeed," Blue's translator said. "Better technology." But the planet had other plans. As the Meridian ship descended, one of the massive storms that rolled off the crystalline mountains swept through the valley. The ship was caught in winds strong enough to toss boulders around like toys. Lightning flashed, striking the rescue vessel multiple times. The Meridian ship managed to retreat, but like the human vessel, it disappeared back into space. Jack and Blue stared at the empty sky. Their best chances at rescue had just failed. Both their peoples had tried and failed to reach them. "How long?" Jack asked, looking at Blue. "How long can we survive the air here?" Blue's translator took a moment to process the question. 3 more days. Maybe 4. Poison building up in bodies. Jack nodded. He could feel it too. A burning in his chest that never went away. A dizziness that got worse each day. He looked at their crashed ships, then at the strange metal showing through the cliff face they'd discovered. "We can't just sit here and wait to die," he said. "Those marks we found, that metal in the cliff. Someone built something here. Maybe they found a way to survive." Blue's skin flickered slightly, their version of a nod. The translator sparked. "Agree. Must find answers, or die trying." They gathered what tools they could carry and waited for the right moment between the flying hunters' attacks. The toxic spores drifted through the air like purple snow, coating everything. In the distance, they could hear the three-headed hunters moving around the edges of the valley, waiting for night to come. They had failed to escape the planet. Now they had to find another way to survive it. Their only hope lay in the mysterious ruins ahead of them, hidden in the cliff face. As they prepared to leave their shelter, Jack looked at Blue. "Ready?" Blue's translator gave their response. "Ready. Together we find way, or together we die." They stepped out into the deadly air, heading toward the ancient metal in the cliff. Behind them, their rescue beacons continued to signal weakly into space, but they knew now that no one was coming to save them. They would have to save themselves. It took them 3 hours to reach the cliff face, moving carefully to avoid the flying hunters. The metal they had seen was actually a door, huge and ancient, covered in strange symbols that neither of them recognized. Years of storms had worn away the rock that had hidden it. "Look at the size of it," Jack said, touching the metal surface. Despite the day's heat, it felt cold under his fingers. His chest burned with each breath, the planet's toxic air slowly poisoning him. Blue's translator crackled. "Door. Need power." They pointed to what looked like a control panel, now dark and dead. Working together, They connected one of their salvaged power cells to the panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like ancient thunder, the door began to move. Dust and small rocks fell as it slowly slid open, revealing a dark tunnel leading into the cliff. "Well," Jack said, coughing, "we didn't come all this way to stand outside." He turned on the light that brought from his ship's emergency kit. The tunnel was huge, big enough for something much larger than either of them. The walls were smooth metal, covered in more of the strange symbols. Their footsteps echoed as they walked deeper into the mountain. The air changed as they went further in. Jack noticed he could breathe a little easier. The burning in his chest lessened slightly. "Air cleaner here," Blue's translator confirmed. "Old machines still work." Filtering. They emerged into a vast chamber that made them both stop in amazement. The room was filled with technology. Machines that hummed softly, lights that still glowed faintly, and in the center, something that made Jack's jaw drop. It was a platform surrounded by tall metal pillars. Each pillar had rings of light slowly moving up and down its length. The platform itself seemed to shimmer, like the surface of water caught in sunlight. "What is it?" Jack asked. Blue moved forward, studying the machine with intense interest. The translator sparked several times before working. "Transport device. Like moving from here to there, in instant." "A teleporter?" Jack asked in disbelief. These aliens built a teleporter. Their excitement was interrupted by a flashing screen near the platform. Blue touched it, and images appeared, recordings left by the beings who had built this place. The images showed creatures unlike anything either of them had seen. Tall, crystalline beings that seemed to be made of the same material as the mountains outside. The images showed their civilization, their cities, and then their end. "They died," Jack said softly, watching the recording. "The same thing that's killing us. The air, the spores, it killed them too." Blue's translator worked rapidly as they studied the alien writing. "Built this to escape, but only worked once. Need much power. Very dangerous." They found more recordings. The crystalline aliens had tried to save themselves by teleporting to another world, but something had gone wrong. The power requirements were enormous, and many had died in failed attempts. Jack's head spun with the implications. They had found both salvation and a new problem. The teleporter could save them, but it would only work once, and it needed more power than they had. Before they could discuss it further, a deep rumble shook the chamber. Rocks fell from the ceiling. Outside, they could hear the storm winds growing stronger. "Storm coming," Blue's translator warned. "Big one." They looked at each other, then at the teleporter. They both knew they were running out of time. The toxic air was killing them slowly, and now a massive storm was approaching that could trap or kill them. "We need to make this work," Jack said, fighting back another cough. "It's our only chance." Blue's skin flickered in agreement. The translator spoke. "Need power cells from ships. Need parts. Very dangerous to get. More dangerous than staying here and dying slowly." The storm's roar grew louder. Through the tunnel, they could hear the screeching of the flying hunters taking shelter. Soon the temperature would drop, and the three-headed hunters would emerge. They had found their way out. Now they just had to survive long enough to use it. They looked at each other, human and alien, both understanding they had to make a choice. Risk everything on one desperate plan, or die slowly in this ancient tomb. But there was something else they didn't know yet. Even if they succeeded, the teleporter would only transport one of them. The storm raged outside the ancient ruins as Jack and Blue planned their mission. They needed three things: the power cores from both their ships and a specific control crystal from Blue's navigation system. Without all three, the teleporter would never work. 2 hours until dark, Jack said, checking his damaged watch. His voice was rough from the toxic air, and each word hurt. "We have to get everything before the night hunters come out." Blue's translator crackled with static before working. Storm very bad. Flying hunters grounded. Good time to move. They had drawn a rough map in the dust on the floor. Their ships were half a kilometer apart, and they needed to carry heavy power cores through the valley, while fighting hurricane-force winds. The purple spores swirled in the air like poisonous snow. Jack touched his chest, feeling the burn in his lungs. How many trips? 1 trip, Blue's translator said. 2 trips, we die. 2 weak now. They were right. Every hour, the poison in the air damaged their bodies more. Jack could see how Blue's once bright skin had turned dull, almost gray. He knew he didn't look much better. His skin had taken on a sickly purple tinge from the spores. They made a sled from pieces of metal found in the ruins. It wasn't pretty, but it would help them move the heavy power cores. As they prepared to leave, Blue suddenly grabbed Jack's arm. The translator sparked. Wait, show something. Blue led him to another screen in the ruins. It showed more recordings from the crystal aliens. Jack watched in horror as it displayed a failed teleporter attempt. The machine overloaded, creating an explosion that destroyed everything nearby. Great, Jack muttered. If we get this wrong, we don't just die. We explode. They had no choice. They left the safety of the ruins, pulling their makeshift sled. The wind hit them like a wall, nearly knocking them over. The air was thick with toxic spores and flying debris. They could barely see a few meters ahead. They reached Jack's ship first. The power core was heavy, and their hands shook as they worked to remove it. Twice they had to stop as violent coughing fits overtook them. By the time they got it onto the sled, they were both gasping for air. Blue's ship was harder. The core was deeper inside, and the navigation crystal was delicate. As they worked, a piece of flying debris smashed through a nearby window. Jack's arm was cut badly, but they couldn't stop. Look, Blue's translator barely worked over the storm. They pointed at the mountains. The sun was setting. Soon the temperature would drop, and the night hunters would come. They were only halfway back to the ruins when they heard it. The 3-headed hunters howling. The sound came from multiple directions. The creatures were moving into the valley early, driven by the storm. Faster. Jack pulled the sled while Blue pushed. Their muscles screamed with effort. The toxic air made every breath feel like swallowing fire. The entrance to the ruins appeared through the storm just as they heard claws scratching on rock behind them. A hunter had found their trail. Its 3 heads swayed on long necks as it stalked toward them. Inside. Now, Jack pulled harder. Blue stumbled, almost fell. The hunter charge. They reached the entrance as the creature lunged. Jack swung the metal bar from the sled, hitting one of its heads. Blue slammed the ancient door control. The massive door began to close, catching another of the beast's heads in the gap. The creature screamed, pulled back, and the door sealed with a boom that echoed through the ruins. They lay on the floor, fighting for breath. The components they needed were with them, but the cost had been high. Jack's arm was bleeding badly, and Blue's translator had been damaged in their rush to escape. With shaking hands, they pulled the sled toward the teleporter chamber. The ancient machine hummed softly, waiting. But as they began to set up the power cores, Blue made a sound like breaking glass, their species' version of a cough. Dark liquid dripped from their mouth. The poison was killing them faster than they'd thought. They had the parts they needed, but time was running out. And they still didn't know that only one of them would be able to leave. The teleporter's control room glowed with new life as Jack and Blue connected the power cores. Outside, the storm howled, and the night hunters screamed, but inside, they focused on their desperate work. Neither noticed the small warning light flashing on the ancient screen until it started beeping. Blue studied the alien text, their damaged translator sparking and cutting out. No good. Very bad. What's wrong? Jack asked, wiping dark blood from his injured arm. The room spun slightly. The poison in his lungs was getting worse. The translator crackled. Machine. Broken. Can only one person. One transport. Jack stared at Blue, then at the teleporter platform. One person. You mean? One lives. One dies. Blue's translator fell silent after that, finally broken beyond repair. They looked at each other in the dim light of the ancient machine. They had fought together, saved each other's lives, and now they faced an impossible choice. Only one could use the teleporter. The other would die here, poisoned by the toxic air. Jack slumped against the wall, coughing hard. Dark spots appeared on his sleeve where he wiped his mouth. The poison was in his blood now. Blue wasn't doing any better. Their skin had turned almost gray, and their movements were slow and painful. Through gestures and drawings in the dust, they tried to plan. The teleporter needed coordinates, somewhere to send whoever used it. Jack knew the coordinates for human space stations. Blue knew the locations of Meridian outposts. But there was another problem. Jack drew a picture of an explosion, then pointed to the word war that he wrote in the dust. He was trying to explain that if either of them appeared suddenly in the other's territory, it might cause panic or even start a war between their species. Blue understood. They had both seen how their peoples had reacted to the unknown, with fear and weapons ready. Time was running out. The poison was killing them faster now. Jack could barely stand, and Blue kept making that terrible glass-breaking sound when they tried to breathe. They had maybe an hour left before they would be too weak to operate the teleporter. Jack looked at the coordinates panel, then at Blue. He stepped back, gesturing for Blue to take the controls. After all, Blue had tried to save him when his ship was crashing. They deserved to live. But Blue shook their head. They pointed at Jack, then at the controls. Their meaning was clear. Jack should be the one to go. Maybe because Jack had shared his food and shelter when they first crashed, even though Blue was a complete unknown. They stood there, each trying to save the other, while precious minutes ticked away. The storm outside grew stronger. The ruins creaked and groaned around them. Through the walls, they could hear the night hunters trying to find a way in. Jack started coughing again, this time falling to his knees. Blue tried to help him up, but they were too weak. Both of them could barely move now. The poison was winning. Then Blue's eyes fixed on something on the ancient screen. They made an excited sound and pulled Jack over to look. Through the haze of pain and dizziness, Jack saw what Blue was pointing at. It was a map, not of human space or Meridian territory, but of something in between. A trading post. Neutral ground. Jack's eyes widened as he understood. Blue was already typing with shaking fingers, entering new coordinates. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something bigger. If they could reach neutral ground, they could prove that their species could work together. Their survival could prevent future wars, create alliances, change everything. But the warning light was still flashing. The teleporter would only work once. Only one person could go. Unless. Blue turned to Jack, their dull skin flickering one last time with an idea. They pointed at both of them, then at the platform, then made a gesture like two things becoming one. Jack stared at the platform, then back at Blue. It was crazy. It was impossible. It was their only chance. The ancient ruins shook as the storm reached its peak. Jack and Blue worked with trembling hands to modify the teleporter platform, fighting against time and the poison in their bodies. Their plan was desperate. They would try to activate the device with both of them on it. The machine wasn't designed for this. The power requirements for one person were already dangerous. For two, it might explode and kill them both. But dying together while trying was better than choosing who would die alone. Suddenly, a massive crash echoed through the ruins. The night hunters had found a weak spot in the ancient walls. They could hear the creatures getting closer, their claws clicking on metal floors, their three heads hissing in the darkness. Now or never, Jack gasped, each word burning his throat. He could barely stand. Blood dripped from his nose. a sign the poison had reached his brain. Blue's skin had turned almost transparent, showing the dark poison spreading through their body. They made that horrible glass-breaking sound with each breath. Together, they stumbled onto the platform. The teleporter hummed louder as they connected the second power core. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. The ancient screen showed danger symbols they didn't need to translate. The power levels were far beyond what the machine was built to handle. A three-headed hunter appeared in the doorway of the teleporter room. Behind it, they could see more coming. The creatures had found them. Blue reached for the activation switch just as the first hunter leaped. Jack grabbed a piece of broken metal and threw it, hitting one of the creatures' heads. The beast stumbled, giving Blue the second they needed. The switch came down. Light filled the chamber, brighter than any sun. The hunters howled and retreated. The ruins groaned as energy surged through systems that had been dormant for centuries. Jack felt Blue's hand grab his arm. He held on tight as reality seemed to tear apart around them. The platform beneath their feet became transparent, showing stars in space and infinite darkness. The machine screamed in protest. Sparks flew from the power cores. The crystal alien's warnings had been right. It was too much power, too much mass to transport. The device was going to explode. But in that moment between moments, as space and time bent around them, something strange happened. Jack felt Blue's thoughts, and Blue felt his. The teleporter wasn't just moving them, it was breaking them down to their basic elements. For a fraction of a second, they weren't human and meridian anymore. They were just energy, just light, just possibility. The explosion came just as the teleporter finished its work. The ancient ruins disappeared in a flash that lit up the valley like a new sun. The night hunters, the toxic spores, the deadly storms, all were vaporized in an instant. On a neutral trading post floating in deep space, alarms blared as an unauthorized transport signature appeared. Security forces rushed to the arrival area, weapons ready. What they found made them stop in shock. Two beings lay on the transport pad, a human and a meridian. Both were unconscious but alive. The poison that had been killing them was gone, burned away by the energy of their desperate transport. But they were changed. A faint blue sheen now shimmered beneath Jack's skin, visible when he moved. And Blue's natural glow now pulsed in time with a human heartbeat. The teleporter had saved them both, but in doing so, it had mixed them slightly, marking them forever as proof that their species could become something new together. When they woke in the trading post's medical bay, their first concern was for each other. The doctors were amazed. No human had ever shown signs of understanding Meridian language before, and no Meridian had ever been able to speak human words. But these two could understand each other perfectly. Their story spread quickly through both human and Meridian space. The tale of two beings who chose to risk everything rather than leave the other behind became the foundation for the first real peace between their peoples. And somewhere, on a deadly planet circling a distant sun, the ruins of an ancient civilization finally crumbled to dust, their last machine having served its greatest purpose, proving that the strongest force in the universe isn't hate or fear, but the choice to face death together rather than survive alone. The end.